Hello, everyone. It's Matt Woods from First Alert 4, and welcome back to Backstory STL. On this show, I interview local people whose life stories have inspired them to make a difference in their community. My guest this week is a storyteller whose work you've probably seen on social media. It all started with an idea based on a similar project in New York. And now, more than 4,500 interviews later, Humans of St. Louis has taught us a lot about ourselves. Here's the backstory of Humans of St. Louis co-founder Lindy Drew. Is this like your full-time job? Is this what you do now?
Yeah, so it's full-time since I graduated from grad school, and that was in 2016. So as I was finishing up social work and public health, I thought, I don't want to stop doing Humans of St. Louis because I was doing it during school. So I took this social entrepreneurship class and really wrestled with whether it should be like a for-profit or a nonprofit. So we incorporated, found some board members, and slowly the team grew from like 2 people to then 5, and then for the book project, 25. We've scaled back now, it's like 15. But I really love it, and I'm blessed to do it full time as an artist, because that's not easy to do either.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't see it any other way. I fell in love with St. Louis, and now I'm just roaming the streets telling stories about people and teaching new storytellers how to interview in the hostel style and photograph in the Humans of St. Louis hostel style.
And so you're not from St. Louis, but you've lived here for like a decade now?
Yeah, so I'm from Phoenix, and after I was there growing up, I ended up going to school for Hawaii for a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that really changed my mind about how I see myself in the world. Came back and graduated, and I kind of never looked back. I took off from there. I've lived in New York City. I lived in Santiago de Chile. I taught English in Ecuador for a bit, and then was a photojournalist in Costa Rica, just to learn and get out of my comfort zone. And then ended up making my way here to St. Louis. I had met a bunch of girlfriends in Santiago de Chile who were also volunteering in the same program I was at, and we all worked at different group homes for kids. And at my group home, I got to teach them photography, which was incredible. And I really kept in touch with the other women I'd volunteered with, and a lot of them came back to St. Louis, or came to St. Louis for graduate school at the Brown School. And I thought, that's interesting. Like, what are you all studying? And I ended up following in their footsteps. And so when a lot of them graduated 3 years later after their dual programs, I entered. And it was a beautiful match. I got great support from the staff and just other professors. And I never would have found myself living in St. Louis. I was actually born in Detroit, Michigan. And so I'm a Midwest girl and lived there till second grade, but don't really remember much about that. So now I'm back. And I stayed because of the project and because of my friendships here and the people. Yeah.
A lot of that stuff you were describing sounds like stuff that a lot of people want to do, but don't end up actually ever doing. So you just kind of went for it. And that's what I feel like the book and Humans of St. Louis kind of seems to me as like somebody just going for it, taking this idea and then just actually making it a reality. So it's kind of based on, the idea came about from Humans of New York, is that right?
Yeah, so my partner for the project, who I started it with originally, she had been following Humans of New York and loved it. I'd never heard of it before. And we ended up meeting when I started school. She was a year ahead of me, and a mutual contact put us in touch. And Carolyn Fish, who had the idea for Humans of St. Louis, she's like, let's just walk the streets, bring your camera, let's see who we meet, let's do some interviews. And it was awkward. It was so awkward. But we'd been reading the Humans of New York interviews and stories, and so they inspired us. And we started to look at interviews that the founder of that project had done, Brandon Stanton. And once we had a compilation of maybe 20 stories and photos, we decided to just launch it. And we did on social media. And after one day, we had like 300 followers. The next day, we had 600 followers. just kind of kept like doubling because people knew the Humans of New York brand.
Okay.
And that St. Louis was trying to like give it a shot. But we didn't put ourselves on the site or talk about who we were. And then media started calling, like, who's behind this project? And we want to interview you. We're like, but it's about the people. It's about their photos. And we tried our best to kind of like stay quiet about who we were and just feed the art project. And then eventually we got more comfortable with the project and what we were doing also. How to ask questions, how to approach people, how to listen to them and dig a little bit more to find out their stories, where to go, where it's empty. And like the whole project's about people. You walk in some places in St. Louis, no one's there. So that was interesting. We had a lot of talks then about how to take on collaborations when companies called to say, we really like what you're doing. What would it look like if you did it for this topic? Like health, education, racism, whatever. And we tried to figure out how would that look? And then eventually she ended up graduating and moving on to New York to become a lawyer. And my then next co-partner for the project was Dessa Summerside, who became my co-author for the book and board president for a bit. Since then, she's moved on, and the project continues. So we just try to feed it as best we can with a photo story every day if it's possible. Usually when I go out, I'll get like 6 to 8 stories. And some people in the end, when we go through the editing process, say, oh, I don't want to include it on the site. I really like to meet you, though. Thanks for chatting with me.
Yeah.
But most of the content that we do get on the site, whether it's me or other storytellers that I work with, it does go live. And I find that fascinating in St. Louis because before I moved here, people would say, don't go to this area. Don't cross the river. Don't go this way. And after all my travels through South and Central America especially, it's like, but what if you go there? What's there? Who's there? And I always find that people find it really curious when I'm walking with my camera. And most of the time, they're like, are you taking pictures? Will you take my picture? What are you taking pictures of? How can I help you? Not all the time, but most of the time. And so a lot of the stories were getting buried on the feed, and we thought, what would it look like to publish? So we did a good faith effort, and we contacted everyone that we could get in touch with in the book, more than half. They signed a model release. We let them know when the book's done, we're going to give you all a complimentary copy. And like so many interesting things happened during that time when we got back in touch with people who we wanted to have in the book. Some people said, when you met me, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that was like one part of my life, but my life's completely changed. That's not who I am anymore. Can you tell my follow-up story? And that was really beautiful and challenging. So some we included in the book. So you turn the page and you get this really beautiful piece that we don't always share online. And then others we would just put online and say, to read their original story, you can check out the book.
Wow. So you have, you got contacts for all the people that you've interviewed to follow up with them. And do you show them what you're going to publish before you do?
Yeah. So in the beginning, when we started walking the streets, we didn't get contact info. We're like, thanks, nice to talk to you.
Right.
And then they'd see their picture up later on the site, and some would say, oh man, you have to take that down. I actually don't want that live. So we had permission and then we didn't.
Right.
And it's wild because you'll publish it and we don't pay for publication. Like we don't pay to post the post. We don't boost it. And like 30,000 people will see it in a few hours. And all of a sudden the person writes back and they're like, you got to take that down. It's like, okay. Sometimes we try to negotiate that. But then we learned early on we need to get their phone numbers and their email and really include them in the editing process. So we ask permission when we first meet them, and then we go back to our computers. We work on it for a few weeks. We send it to them. And then if they want to tweak anything, they can. Or if they're like, ooh, don't include the first story you got about my husband leaving me, but you can include this story about my children. It's just very delicate, and it makes sense. St. Louis is small. So for the book, we talked to some lawyers at the law clinic at WashU, and they said you have to do a good faith effort to reach these people and tell them you're going to publish, because your online site is just like a news site. But with the book, you're going to capitalize on it. And we don't want anybody to come back and feel like they were treated unfairly. So run it by them. And maybe like 3 people said, yeah, I don't want to be in the book, because they talked a lot of smack about St. Louis, which makes sense, you know? To which my editing team said, but those stories are so relevant, because we all talk smack about St. Louis.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you get that in there?
If you've lived here for more than a day, I mean, there's something to complain about.
Exactly. So we tried to find some of those too, and we did. We did. People were like, I love it here. Why do you love it here? I don't know. It's just here. It's just home. You know, I wouldn't go anywhere else, you know. But I remember one lady said, she was downtown when I met her. And she had said, my parents don't know that I'm downtown today. I think she was like in college. And I was like, oh, okay, well, what do you do? And she's like, oh, I'm a communications major. And it was so interesting, because she was like, if I had to rebrand St. Louis, that's the question. Like, if you had to rebrand St. Louis, what would you say? She's like, well, I'll tell you this. From where I drive from into St. Louis, if you can see the arch, people say you've gone too far. Like, you're too close to the city. And you can see the arch from like Maplewood, and you can see the arch from the county, and it just really saddens me how people do talk smack about St. Louis, but they don't always contribute to improving St. Louis. So like, as an outsider who's been here for a decade, this is my little contribution from me and my team, you know, and we want to keep it going on the website too.
Yeah. And so you had hundreds of followers on the first day whenever you guys published? That's crazy.
Yeah,
like, coming out of like nowhere.
Coming out of nowhere. We didn't like write anybody. We didn't like let them know. We just started to have friends notice, because we would post, and then we'd share on our personal pages, and our network started to say, oh, that's neat, and share, and then it started to grow. And I think a lot of just early adopters who really appreciate the Humans of Style and like the New York one, they're like, cool, what's the St. Louis one going to be? And we didn't even know. We didn't know where we were going to go, who we were going to meet, if people were going to be receptive. And so in the beginning, the stories were like 1-liners and 2 lines and like cute things kids say. And then we started to sit down with people and recognize, with our social work degree, we can have longer, more in-depth conversations and start to really get to the heart of issues that are about the city, the history, people, and that's how that started to happen. Yeah.
Do you remember the first one that you tried, how like weird it was trying to talk to somebody?
Yeah, Carolyn reminded me one time when we gave a speech, and she was like, we gave a talk, and we had gone downtown, it was kind of cold out, and we met 3 guys at a bus stop, and we walked up to this one guy and asked him, what do you do for a living? And he's like, I'm a street pharmacist. And we're like, cool, tell us about that. So he did. And then when it came time to take his picture, like, are you ready for your portrait? He just ran around the bus stop. And he's like, no, we're not doing this. Nope. And we told him what this was about, but he's like, it's getting too real. No one can know my face and can't ruin the business. And it was really funny. And on our way home, Carolyn and I talked in the car, and we're like, you know what? We have to figure out another angle to let these subjects know that we're genuinely curious about who they are, you know, what they've done, where they're at in life right now, what lessons they have that they could teach our audience and ourselves. And that's when we started to form more open-ended questions and recognize, like, a lot of the massaging happens with that first contact with the person. And then as you're rolling out the red carpet for them to talk about their life, just listening and taking it all in. We didn't even have business cards at the time because we weren't a business. So we would write like the Facebook handle on like a ripped piece of paper and give it to people. It wasn't a real thing. It was just a fun side art project that we wanted to do in school.
Yeah.
And Carolyn told me from the beginning, she's like, I always start things like this, like art projects or ideas, and I'm okay letting them go. And I really wanted her to be a part of the project, like, for a long time. And she was with it for about, I want to say 4 years, and it was time for her to move on. And I was like, I'm not ready to leave it yet. I want to keep it going. So she encouraged me to, and when I graduated, it became my full-time job. So that's what I do. I'll hang exhibitions around town at different schools, Of course, we like feed the site so that people get the everyday storytelling. Companies call to partner, and we figure out like interesting ways to tell the stories that they're looking to tell, which is really fun. And I'll present to high schools, colleges, businesses, and every group wants to know something different. Like, how did you start this? How do you do this full time? How do you walk the streets of St. Louis? Like, ooh. And then they're really interested just about the business side of it. Like, how's it sustainable? And the interviewing part, like, how do you talk to people? And why do you think that they share with you? And I love talking about all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that sounds kind of terrifying, to be honest. Even as somebody whose job it is to talk to people, ask them questions, even when I have to cold call somebody that I've never talked to before, it's still terrifying. I'm like, okay, what am I going to say? What is, like kind of lay it out. And it's funny because, I mean, I'm definitely an introvert, but just once you get over that hump of like, why is this person talking to me? What do they want? What's their motivation? All this stuff. And then once you realize somebody is just talking and they're not really thinking about why you're asking the question, it's just kind of a conversation as if you kind of knew the person in a way. But to get over that, like that's the hardest part about interviews, because you can tell pretty easily when somebody's guarded or they're scared or they're not telling you the information that you're trying to find out. So yeah, how do you I mean, with your social work background, that seems like that would help a lot, but how do you like get past the surface level to like dig deeper and get the real story from people?
Yeah, isn't it interesting? Like, you interview for a living and you're like, ooh, it's kind of scary sometimes. And sometimes I do feel that too. I could get really intimidated with people as well. But with the way that we'll do the typical street interviews is I'll be on my bike or I'll walk around and my camera's always on so people know I'm in photography mode. And now we do have business cards, so I'll approach people if I'm alone and just say, hey, my name's Lindy. I do this blog, and we photograph people and tell their lives and a portion of a story. Would you like to participate? And that's how it starts. And then they have some questions like, where's it going to go? And how much time does it take? So I'll just give them the whole spiel all at once. It could take anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour. It's going to go on our social media sites, usually Facebook and Instagram. Sometimes we do a gallery exhibit. We have a book out. Do you mind if I record audio? Let's just start right there. And I always interview them first. So I wait to take the photo to the end where we can like build that a relationship a little bit more and have them seriously look back at the camera and just confront the camera for the portrait. But I think there's a lot of power in the questions. And so typically I'll go out and I'll think of 3 to 5 questions I want to focus on for that day. And I gather the questions from social media sometimes, where I'll just be scrolling and looking how other people have answered things or talked about topics that I'm actually interested in too lately. Lately it happens to be like finance, investments, inheritance, things that are like circling around money, always relationships and love. How did you meet? What's your pet peeve with your partner? You know, like what's been the hardest challenge that you've had in your relationship? How'd you overcome it? I really like those topics a lot right now. But I'll have these questions in my back pocket and I'll put my phone in airplane mode and I'll just ask them to tell the whole truth and not a half truth. And they're like, okay. And I just start with one random question. I know nothing about the person typically. I'm not looking to find out where they live and how old they are and how many brothers and sisters they have. That's so just like a very closed-ended question with like one answer. My thought process behind it is like you ask this question that's so open-ended that psychologically the person has to really think about something that's personal about them. and it clicks to a story in their life that I would have never have gotten if I didn't ask that person at that time. So yesterday, for example, I went out with one of my new storytellers. It was really windy, so it was a challenge because there weren't a lot of people out. And we did one interview before heading to the Foundry to do like 7 more because, we had the protection of the walls. But we met a guy at a bus stop, and we asked him, was there ever one that got away? And that was it. And he thought about it, and in like 10 seconds, he launched into his story. And you'll see it soon. We'll publish it soon. But he basically said that he was dating someone for a while, and he ended up having a really bad relapse. And when she found out, she was done. She's like, this is a non-negotiable. I don't want to date someone who drinks. And she left, and it was a wake-up call for him. So he went to AA, and he's been a year clean at that moment when we met him. And he started to talk about how all these other relationships in his life has thrived. So unfortunately, he lost this woman that he would have really liked to have continued with, but the relationships with his children has gotten better. His work has gotten better. With himself, it's gotten better. And you could just tell in his eyes. He looked back at us in the wind. One eye kind of open, one eye closed, but like he just talked and got it off his chest. And we asked him, do you know where she's at? And he said, she's here. She's in South City. I don't really know where. We're not in touch. So we're like, well, if we share your story and she sees it and reaches out, can we reach out? And he's like, I'm open to that. That would be great. And I just think it's so beautiful to meet this random dude in his t-shirt and pants. And most people were just on that street by Bevo Mill, and they just drove right by. Like, it's just another guy waiting for a bus. But here's this piece now that really humanizes who this man is. And so we put him on the site, and the conversation will unfold from there, and maybe the magic behind the scenes of like what could happen. I always tell people, I'm like, if we ever, through a story, connected people who ended up getting engaged or wanting to get married, I would totally shoot their wedding for free. Like, let's do it.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, like let's follow the story out completely. Like, how did this happen from a hostile interview? I think it'd be really beautiful.
Well, the second book maybe can be those connections.
Maybe.
Well, if you've interviewed, how many people have you interviewed?
We've interviewed over 4,600.
Woo.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
Have you ever went up to interview somebody and they said, oh yeah, you interviewed me like 2 years ago?
Yes.
Because I would imagine after you've seen so many people and you're just out and about looking for people, you're bound to double up somewhere, right?
Matt, that's happened a few times. And I didn't recognize them because their wardrobe was completely different. Like their style was so different. Or like their haircut was so different. Or like after COVID, they changed so much. So it has happened. It happened yesterday at the Foundry.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the storyteller I was with, Kiara and I went to go shoot there. And we talked to these 2 young boys, and we got permission from one of their moms. And as we were interviewing, the boys hinted that mom was a restaurant owner, and they called out the name of the restaurant. And I was like, wait a minute, have I interviewed you before? And the mom's like, I think so. So that was like a decade ago. So that was wild. Wouldn't have recognized her.
Isn't it so interesting when people that you randomly meet do just start, like spilling so much information that you didn't expect?
I love it. That's like the point where I thrive. I think it's really hard for me to have topical conversations that are just surface level, and they're not really memorable in the end. And we do this all the time. We do it when we meet someone new. We do it at a party. We do it at a networking event. We do it, when we're in line waiting to check our bags in at the airport. And like, we have to do it. But where I really love to spend my time is one-on-one with conversations where you really get to know someone or a piece about them that they otherwise wouldn't have shared with somebody else, but they feel comfortable sharing it. And then it is a next step to actually have it published and, you know, be in front of so many people. Because let's face it, St. Louis is really small. I'll interview people sometimes, and then my friends will text me and be like, how do you know Carol? How do you know, you know, Dallas or whatever? It's so interesting. But I think it's really neat that in a city like St. Louis, time and time again, people do really want to have that connection. And, you know, one of the people on my team early on, he always reminds me about how we walk around on our phones and we're looking down and we sit down and we're just on our phones waiting for time to pass and looking for something to do and that dopamine spike. But a lot of folks, like, they don't have a deep social network. They're looking for connection. And we have it right there on that device, and we're the most disconnected. And it's really cool to meet someone and then all of a sudden have a conversation about a variety of topics that I don't know what we're going to talk about in that day. The question is designed for someone to choose the topic. I don't really choose a lot of the times what we're going to talk about. They're so open-ended. Like, if you have a fork in the road, if you had a fork in the road one time, why did you choose the direction you chose and why? What's a conversation you'd like to have that you haven't been having, but you know it's necessary? When's a time that you should have spoken up and you didn't? And then all of a sudden, people are talking about finances, love, education, you know, a new move, a new baby, a new idea, you know, what's a dream you had that you let go of? So I'm not always choosing to walk up to someone and say, tell me about, you know, your wedding since you're married. It's not like that. Once in a while, we'll have collaborations and the companies want us to focus on something so specific, and we'll let those people know. We're approaching you because this is the idea of our project. We're partnering with this group, and they're asking us to talk about this thing. So a couple years ago, Forward Through Ferguson partnered with us to talk about transforming the 911 system. And they were like, we want to set you loose in the city, go meet people, and ask them what their experience is calling 911.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's so specific. Not everybody has an experience.
Right. You gotta find them. But I'm sure you found some pretty interesting stories out of that.
Totally. So went to Forest Park and just started chatting with folks. And some people were like, I don't think I have one. But it was okay because then we could talk about something else because I'm still interviewing them, so we could use the photo and story for the page.
Yeah.
And after we started talking, they're like, oh no, Lindy, you know what? I do have a story about 911. I totally forgot. And then they would share. They're like, yeah, I was waiting in line at this restaurant. I went out with some friends. We drank the night before. We were a little in need of water. And while we waited in this long line for a while, my friend fainted and we had to call 911. Whereas I talked to the next person, he's like, oh yeah, no, I will never call 911. There's no reason for me to call. I know who to call if there's an emergency. You're not going to find me calling 911. And it generated really interesting engagement and discussion around that. To think about yourself and when you have called and how you've been treated on the other end of that call, it made me think about the time I had to call 911. And it wasn't an emergency, but I also was like really astounded by the reaction when the officer had to come to my house to tell them the report that I had to tell them. It's like, okay, that's a story now. That happened in St. Louis. And it's just, sometimes we don't talk about these things, and it's really important to be able to do that for the safety of everybody.
Yeah.
You know? So I love the work from like the littlest thing that we do to share a one-liner to the deeper interviews that we'll get into that end up becoming like 8 or 10 or 12 stories deep on the page that we share like over days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you tell me the story behind this man on the cover?
Yeah, so this is Jerome Scrooge Harris. So he's known by Scrooge in his community. He is a jazz musician who's taught a lot of youth over the years in St. Louis. And I met him this day in the Loop, and I was just really drawn to his look because visually he's an interesting guy.
The glasses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he said yes to the photo in the interview, and that's what he shared with me a story about how when he was younger, he wanted to play the drums. And his mom and dad were talking about it, and mom had to go out of town for work or something. So she told her husband, I don't want to come home and see that Jerome has a drum set. So she left for work, like to a different city. And when she came home, Jerome had that drum set.
Oh my god.
And that's what his story's about in the book. And when we decided on the cover, we did the good faith effort to reach out to everybody on the front and the back cover too, and inside. And I called Jerome and I was like, do you remember me? He's like, of course I do. How have you been? And it was during COVID. And he's like, I'm still here, Lindy. He's like, I would be honored to be on the cover of your book.
Wow.
It was so sweet. It
Yeah.
was like so sweet. And I love who we chose to put on the cover of the book. Like, we've got a pretty diverse array of people who worked on the book, and to make a decision of like, we're putting one person on the book and cover, and like, this is who we're choosing, like, as St. Louis, that meant a lot. It could have been anybody. We toyed with ideas of doing a collage and doing colored photos, and this one just worked well with this pop of red to represent Brick City and like the blue intertwine that represents
Lights aren't off.
the confluence.
Their
and stuff.
motion. Sorry. There we go. We were being too still.
Little technical changes here in the studio.
Sorry, please continue.
So Jerome came to our opening for the book, our book launch, which was put on by Left Bank Books at one of the local libraries. And he spoke, and he was just so humble and so prideful, and he brought his family. It was very beautiful. He signed some copies of the books. I think we have like 6 with his signature on the cover, which is cool. And then that was a few years ago. And last year, around the holiday time, I took the books to a gala for an organization and set them up in the back to sell them and give some away. And a gentleman came up to me before the gala started, and he's like, I had to get a closer look. I think I know that guy. I think I've played music with that guy before. And I was like, you know Jerome? He's like, I did. He passed away last year. And that's how I found out. And I really would like to get in touch with his sister who came to the book launch and ask her what happened and if she has any other stories about him that she'd like to share. And I haven't just gotten around to it yet. But what's interesting is, as I was making the book with my team, people would write the Humans of St. Louis site if we had interviewed someone before. Mm-hmm. And they'd say, we just want to let you know that this person passed away. Maybe you could reshare their story because I know it was, it was received really well. And so we have a page in the back of the book of all the people in the book who we know that have passed, and it's like a dedication to them. And when the book got printed and other people started to pass away and they would, like, family would let me know, it was just such a moment to think like, okay, as a documentarian, I love getting photography and doing street photography of people and faces, and sometimes hands if you have to hide their faces. But it really saddens me that one day, like, this is going to be this little time capsule of people who existed in St. Louis, and we're all gone or we've moved on.
Yeah.
And it's happening, like, slowly. So it makes me always wonder who photographs you and who takes the time to hear your story and to document it or to remember it or, like, to keep it alive. Like, I really love seeing this book on shelves at a bookstore, and what you see are very historical books about St. Louis or children's books about St. Louis or covers with, like, the arch on it, And then there's this one that's all about people.
Yeah.
And it's like 5 years of a compilation that can give so much to the person who ends up picking it up.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like a chronicle of history in a way of St. Louis. Like, it'll always be there as time passes. Like I look at like
Yeah.
journalism is just a chronicle of several drafts of history, but you know, it's kind of it's always there to like look back on and show what's happened, and this is kind of a way to do that.
100%. And like when we made it, we didn't have anything in the bank before we started. We had 0.00 in the bank. And we just had the idea of like, what if we published like Humans of Dublin or Humans of Amsterdam, like cities from around the world? What if we did that? And now we did. So it exists here in this like little flyover city, how some people see it. But like we want to put St. Louis on the map. So this is one way to do it, through the arts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've covered a lot of stuff around addiction, specifically like fentanyl and stuff like that. And we published a documentary a couple years ago now. There were 4 different men who had previously been addicted to fentanyl. And it was probably early December or so. I thought it might be interesting to do like a follow-up to those 4 men and see where they are now, because like although they were in better places then than they had been, it's like a lot of times for people it's a continuous thing that they have to keep working at and stuff like that. And one of them unfortunately ended up dying from suicide. And it was he actually after I interviewed him, he would just like randomly call me and tell me stuff about his life, like just kind of just unsolicited, like call me, and I was like, yeah, that's great, Justin, and all that stuff. And so I felt I kept up with him more than any of the other people. And so it kind of hurt. Like you feel like rooting for somebody to make it, and then to see them not make it, and the I guess maybe a little bit of irony that it wasn't a drug overdose that he decided to take his own life. So
that's so powerful. I mean, especially like following someone's journey for so long, and they obviously have the rapport with you to want to reach out and to tell you more. Like, oh, you're a listening ear and you're in my corner. It's a beautiful thing to be on that receiving end.
yeah.
And also it's really stark to find out, like, wait a minute, what happened? Just that was making me think, like, there's stories in the people who are part of his network. Where's his family? Where's his friends? What did they think?
I went to the wake of his funeral.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it was tough. We had a 30-minute special here, like a live special to talk about fentanyl crisis, and he was on, and that was the last time I had saw him. So it was like almost a year later, and I never met his family before. I'd talked to somebody who works with to help people who are addicted to alcohol or fentanyl, and so met him through a mutual connection, but never actually met his family. And I mean, he wanted to live a better life so bad, you could tell. And with him, he started this Facebook page for people who were in recovery, and would just like share like motivational stuff and stuff like that. And it was this little community that he had started, and there was like a couple thousand people that were in it from, I think, not just St. Louis but other places too. And so yeah, it was of course a shock, like most of the time it is. But yeah, I mean, it's just it sucks to see that happen.
It does. And like, even talking about the topic of drugs, drug use, fentanyl, it's big anywhere in the United States, and it's specific to like where you live too. And I'm thinking about stories when I've approached people too and asked like, who's your mentor? Who's been your biggest cheerleader? And they've told me stories about like their uncle who passed away from a fentanyl overdose, but then the tears start streaming, and it's incredibly sad, and the moment's devastating. And how do you interview someone like that that's been very honest with you, and within 30 seconds, a minute, they share something so personal, and you're like, what do I do? What did I just do?
Right.
And I'll try to like focus on, tell me about that person's spirit and heart, and who were they, and why were they in your corner, and like humanize them for me. And I'll let the person know, maybe sharing a story on Humans of St. Louis or like you did, it gets to memorialize them. And it's a way of just remembering them, which is very sacred to the person who decided to share that bit of information about this human being that's like no longer with us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the hope. And some people are really worried about what they're gonna say, and it's obviously really hard to talk about as someone that's not there anymore. But then some people will just let that guard down and start talking about it. And like recently, this woman who I've interviewed a couple times, and she was talking about her brother, and he felt really lonely before he died, and ended up dying of a fentanyl overdose. And then his funeral was like packed. There were so many people there. He was like 21 years old. And she was like, it was such a stark contrast from what he thought he was to what he really was, but the show of the people that showed up to his funeral. And I was like, I don't think most of the people who die from overdoses or suicide realize that whenever they're in that state. I mean, it's a disease. And a lot of people don't realize that, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's one photo in the book that's not mine. All the photos are ones that I've taken, but there's one gentleman in the book, and I didn't anticipate him telling this story, but it's connected to what we're talking about. And he was taking a break from the bar he worked at, and he was outside having a smoke. And I always just walk outside, and he was there, and he's like, I'd love to interview me, that's fine. He had a St. Louis hat on. I got up real close and took this beautiful portrait of him looking right back at me. And he said the thing he was going through right now is that his girlfriend recently passed of an overdose. And I asked him, do you have a picture of her? And he shared it. And oftentimes we'll share that like in the carousel on Instagram or in the comment on Facebook. So we included her photo in the book to humanize her and say, we're not just talking about an addict. We're talking about a real person who was a mother and a daughter and a girlfriend. It meant a lot to him. And I think there's ways to talk about an issue like fentanyl or drug addiction, where a lot of times we see things in numbers and charts and data points, and there's humans that are behind those numbers, and knowing those stories or sharing them with someone who has no idea what it's like to relate to a topic like that, it's really crucial. It's so important.
Yeah.
Hit them right in the heartstrings.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And I think a lot of people, whenever they say like, oh, my family member died of an overdose or suicide or, whatever preventable death it is, and a lot of people say, oh, I'm so sorry. But instead of just that, you could say, oh, what was their name? Or what were they doing? What were their, like, where were they going? There was a finality to it, but they probably had so much more.
I love
life to
that,
live.
Matt. That's beautiful. I'll have to think about that the next time that happens in one of my interviews.
I don't think if I didn't cover the topic so much the last couple years, I don't think that I would have that, like under my belt, I guess. But after talking to more people than most of that have those stories, I mean, it's tragic, but it's also preventable. So I feel like it's still worth talking about.
One question I'll ask people too when it gets to that moment and you're like, what do you say? Is I'll ask them, what do you remember the last thing was that they said to you or your last interaction? And sometimes it's a text message that they hold on to, or just they remember the last conversation that they had. And it's just really telling.
Yeah.
It's really telling because we live our lives just like day to day, and we don't know when our time is going to come, or for a loved one, or like someone that you know. And then all of a sudden, like when you ask that question and it hits, it's powerful.
Yeah.
Someone who's like, I hadn't talked to them in weeks. Like, why not? I mean, I got a message today about someone in our dancing scene that I'm part of. And she just texted, did you know so-and-so passed? And it was like, wait a minute. And then all these memories flooded into my mind of when I've seen her in the dancing scene. And it's like, what's the story? What happened? When's the wake? Very real topic. I think what I really enjoy about doing humans actually is that we can go from a topic like that that's so profound and deep and sensitive to then something funny that kids say every day.
Mm-hmm.
Or to then a story about, I'm a new homeowner. I never thought this would happen. Or first graduate of, my family. Or here's this company that I built and I'm an entrepreneur and I never thought I would do something like that. And so you can constantly swim in this area of like, in Spanish, it's funny because my mother-in-law will say when someone's listening to like baladas, like music that's very just sentimental, she's like, ay, la música cortavenas, the music that like cuts your veins. And sometimes I think about that with the storytelling, like it's very deep and profound and like jarring. But then the next day, we can soften it with something that's like very uplifting and profound as well, and like the opposite side of the spectrum. And that's what's kind of fun about the site.
Yeah.
Like it could be empty, I have nothing to share. And as soon as I go out and meet someone, like these are the 7 stories I'll collect in like 3 or 4 hours. And then you just kind of sprinkle them throughout the site, along with the photos of who we're talking to. And then it just looks so different, so colorful and like vibrant. I really appreciate that, especially in a city like this where it can be so black and white and divided.
So what do you hope people do with the book?
Well, already they've like blown me away with the support that they have given us.
I'm sorry. Keep
Light
going up.
difficulty.
Okay, sorry.
When we did our first publication, it took 4 or 5 years to make it, but we had built up the energy behind it to let people know, like, it's coming, it's coming. We lost our printer. We found a new one. It's coming, it's coming. It's COVID. Like, all the ships are blocked from overseas. The book's not here yet.
Oh
like,
my gosh.
finally it's here. It was a wild ride. The book is a story in and of itself. It has its own story. But when we finally dropped the book, we sold out of almost 2,250 copies in like 3 weeks, which was awesome. And then Christmas hit and we had nothing. So with the generosity of Regional Arts Commission, we were able to do another print run of 5,000. We have half of those left to sell. So we have them in like 30 bookstores. But my hope is that people want to continue picking up copies so that they can gift it to friends, they can gift it to awardees at their work, they can raffle it off as prizes for an event that's like so St. Louis. Some people in the book have purchased multiple copies to say, I keep giving it away to family or whatnot. Like, I took my daughter's copy, I need another one. And it is nice to see when people take a picture of it and send it to me because it's on someone's coffee table, or they notice it out in public, or they're waiting to have a meeting with someone and it's out in like the lobby and they're fingering through it like, look, it's here, it's all over. I love seeing that. And that's really beautiful. So yeah, if folks want to get it, they can go to our website, humansofstl.org, or they can also find on our website what our retailers are. But we decided not to sell on any other channel, so we're not on Amazon. And the reason for that is because we wanted a portion of the funds to go back to the mom and pop bookstores that are local. So when you buy your book, your Humans of St. Louis book, at Left Bank Books or at the Novel Neighbor or at like Urban Matter in South Grand, a portion of the money that you're spending keeps those businesses alive, as opposed to if someone had a discount code on Amazon and purchased the book for a little bit less, but then we don't have these local bookstores that do so much for our community. They provide reading materials for all ages, and they have banned books to say, here's why you can read these things. Like, don't be afraid of these topics. Jump into this work. So that's really crucial too. And the book supports the nonprofit so that we can still hire other storytellers and have the photography equipment and the updates that we need to be able to keep doing this work and blow up the photos and and share these pieces. Because sometimes I think about, like, I'm from Arizona and I moved here and fell in love with the place, but who else is doing this? And if I leave one day, who's going to do it?
Right.
So we need the opportunity to train other people and recruit them and keep it up if we'd like to also stay afloat.
Is there anything else you think I missed?
That was a great interview.
Oh, thank you. I try.
I could always talk more and more about the book. I'm grateful that you invited me to come in here today to highlight it.
Of course.
Because it's a couple years old now. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary with
Oh, wow, nice.
Hostel, which was pretty neat. But I think the last thing that's kind of fun to talk about is our evolution and where we're at now that the second print run's done. And we had a producer meet us over at the storage facility and ask, what would you like to do now that the book's complete? And I had seen so many people doing storytelling over video over the years. And I told her it would be a dream to take Hostel to the streets and be able to get audio and movement and layer these stories and tell them a little bit longer and have it be more nuanced and complicated in that way. And she's like, let's see what we can do. So as of last year, we dropped our first 2 episodes in collaboration with PBS. And it's about the Latino community that's out here. We're working on our 3rd and 4th episode right now. And you can find it at 9PBS's website, their digital series. So it's on their YouTube channel.
How long are those episodes?
They're like 8 to 10 minutes. So the idea is we compile 3 and then we package it for broadcast television, which they actually shared a couple of them last week for the first time ever.
Oh, exciting.
It was really exciting. And it's really neat, too, to be able to focus on the Latino community here. Because sometimes when I'm walking the streets or my storytellers are walking the streets, we don't have access to certain people because they're working, because it's cold outside, because we're not in that part of town when they're like out at a park or in front of their house. Maybe there's a language barrier. And so this has been really special to be able to focus on local bakeries and the local salsa place and the local free trade store. And within that, we get to amplify these individual stories who are entrepreneurs and immigrants and it's totally like part of the fabric of St. Louis, just like you and I.
Yeah, well, 8 to 10 minutes is actually pretty long for broadcast. That's a lot. You need a lot of material for that.
A lot of material,
Yeah.
yeah. We'll pre-interview for 4 or 6 hours, and then we'll get together to actually sit down with the lighting and the camera, interview for 1 or 2, and then find a couple other people that can really like fill out that person's story. And we'll get some photography as visuals and shoot B-roll, figure out the music, audio, intro, and then go through a couple like edits of that, solidify it, and it's ready to go. So it's a different beast. It's a different way to think about storytelling. But I love the challenge and I love the topic as well. So it's been welcomed like very warmly by the STL community and the Latino community. So we hope to keep going.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Thanks for listening and watching Backstory STL. We'll release new episodes every Wednesday. Check it out on the First Alert 4 app or wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.